Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
A few years back, I was juggling online college courses while helping my cousin, who was basically my sister since we grew up together. She was going through a rough patch. Single mom with a toddler and a dad battling stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Talk about life hitting you all at once. When her dad got too sick to watch her son anymore, she had to put him in daycare. But she could only work half shifts because the daycare only kept him until 12:30. One day, she mentioned how tight money was getting, and I offered to help. I could do my coursework in the morning and watch my nephew in the afternoon. It was a no-brainer. We're family after all. Everything was smooth sailing for about 6 months until the daycare decided to clean house. They fired all the experienced staff and replaced them with fresh college graduates. That's when the trouble started. One morning, my cousin called me, sounding frustrated. She told me the daycare wanted her to pick up my nephew right away because they supposedly couldn't handle him. When I asked what time it was and what had happened, she explained it was only 11 a.m. and they hadn't even given him lunch yet. They just kept saying they couldn't handle him without any explanation. This became a daily occurrence. After a week, my cousin confronted the director. She accused the director of trying to get her fired by calling her at work every day when they knew someone else was designated to pick up my nephew. The director claimed she wasn't aware of the early pickups, then mentioned they had multiple complaints about my nephew. When my cousin asked about these complaints, saying this was the first she'd heard of any issues, the director refused to discuss them, citing privacy concerns. They agreed to reduce the hours and fees, but things only got worse. They started calling me at 10:50 a.m. to pick him up, literally when I was walking out the door for the regular 11 a.m. pickup. The director even had the nerve to call me one day, accusing me of being deliberately late when I knew I had a problem child. When I demanded to know what the exact problem was, she kept mentioning these mysterious complaints but wouldn't give any details. She then threatened to call my nephew's grandfather. I had to remind her that his grandfather was dying of cancer and in hospice care, and that she couldn't seriously be considering bothering him. That day, I was deliberately late picking him up, just 20 minutes. What I found made my blood boil. My 2-year-old nephew was sitting outside alone with the door locked. No staff in sight. I waited in my car for 5 minutes, recording everything on my dash cam, but no one came out. The director had actually called my uncle anyway, causing him panic and distress. She'd told the hospice worker it was a medical emergency when it wasn't. That's when we decided to go nuclear. We called the police about child abandonment. I had dash cam footage as evidence. My cousin called social services, where we learned we weren't the only ones complaining. The hospice supervisor even got involved, reporting them to the insurance board for contacting my uncle against protocol. When asked about the daycare, my nephew only said they were mean, but being just 2 years old, he couldn't explain more. We never sent him back. The investigations from the county, police department, and state insurance board revealed multiple complaints of egregious acts against the child. The daycare was shut down within a month. The district attorney contacted us for interviews, but my uncle passed away before he could give his statement. The silver lining? My cousin's co-worker told us about a county program that paid me $700 monthly to watch my nephew. I got to finish my degree while helping family, and my cousin had one less thing to worry about. The old daycare building eventually became a new daycare center, but we stuck with family care after that experience. Sure, another daycare opened in that building later, but neither my cousin nor I ever considered sending our kids there. Some bridges just can't be unburned. My boyfriend and I have been together for 9 years, living together for 8 of those years. We both work in tech, which means we're not wealthy, but comfortable enough to have our own place. Life was pretty good until we had to take in my younger brother. 7 years ago, my parents kicked my brother out of their house because of his drug problems. He was living in his car and I couldn't bear to see him like that. After discussing it with my boyfriend, we agreed to let him stay with us until he got back on his feet. I told my boyfriend we had a spare room and my brother just needed some time to sort himself out. My boyfriend agreed but made it clear that my brother would need to contribute to the household once he found work. The first couple of years were actually decent. My brother got clean, found a job at a local warehouse, and seemed to be getting along great with my boyfriend. They even started an indoor gardening project together, buying all sorts of hydroponics equipment and growing vegetables. It was nice seeing them bond over something productive, but then things started changing. My brother became increasingly withdrawn, spending most of his time in his room. The chores we'd agreed he'd handle started piling up. Dishes in the sink, trash not taken out, bathroom left a mess. I tried talking to him about it multiple times. I confronted him about the chores we'd agreed he'd handle, asking what was going on. He brushed me off, saying he'd get to it later because he was tired from work. When I pointed out he'd said the same thing yesterday and the day before, he snapped at me, arguing that he paid rent so I should get off his back. It got to the point where my boyfriend and I were doing everything ourselves. The only thing that kept our floors clean was this robot mop we got from my grandmother when she moved to a retirement community. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple device you fill with cleaning solution and attach disposable pads to. My boyfriend and I split the cost of the pads and maintained it, while my brother never once helped with it. 6 months before our lease was ending, I'd had enough. I told him he needed to find his own place because this wasn't working anymore. He dismissed me with a whatever, saying this place sucked anyway. He did move out, but he kept his key to gradually move his stuff. That should have been my first red flag. He'd show up unannounced, sometimes when we weren't even home. Then last night, my boyfriend couldn't find our robot mop. We'd just gotten new pads delivered and wanted to set it up. I texted him asking if he'd seen the robot mop. He replied saying it was his. When I confronted him about never buying pads or even using it, he sent an angry message telling me to stop being weird, complaining about his stolen grow equipment, and warning me to stop texting before I made him mad. I was furious, not just about the robot mop, but about his entitled attitude after everything we'd done for him. I immediately sent him a message telling him to return his key to the office and that he wasn't welcome to come by unannounced anymore. I added that if he needed anything else, we would look for it ourselves. That's when things got interesting. Remember that indoor gardening equipment he mentioned? Well, my boyfriend had been documenting everything they bought together with receipts. We contacted the police and filed a report for both the stolen robot mop and the missing gardening equipment that my brother took without splitting as agreed. The day before Thanksgiving, the police showed up at my brother's new apartment. Turns out he wasn't just growing vegetables anymore. They found an illegal growing operation. He was arrested, and among his things were our robot mop and all the gardening equipment. My boyfriend and I didn't attend Thanksgiving that year. Instead, we spent it at home with our recovered robot mop, watching movies and enjoying our peaceful, clean floors. Sometimes I feel guilty about how things turned out, but then I remember the 7 years we spent supporting him only to be treated like we were nothing. The police involvement wasn't about the robot mop. It was about the principle, and sometimes principles come with unexpected consequences. Some background. My dad passed away in 2016. While he wasn't my biological father, he signed my birth certificate when I was born and raised me as his own. He was everything a father should be, and I never felt like I was anything less than his daughter. We lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and both his siblings, my aunt and uncle, lived nearby. 2 years after losing my dad, my grandmother, his mother, passed away in 2018. It was a difficult time for everyone, but what happened next will reveal the true colors of some family members. My uncle approached my mom shortly after the funeral to inform us that my grandmother had left me $10,000 in her will, but specified that I couldn't access it until I turned 21. I was 15 at the time, and while I was grieving, knowing that my grandmother had thought of me brought some comfort. I tucked that information away, focusing on getting through high school and dealing with the loss of both my dad and grandmother. Things started getting messy in 2021. My aunt and uncle were trying to sell some land that had belonged to my dad. One day, I received paperwork in the mail that made my blood boil. My uncle told me I needed to sign documents stating that my dad wasn't my biological father. When I asked why I would need to do that, my aunt jumped in saying it was just a formality, claiming that since he wasn't my biological father, I didn't really have rights to the land sale money. I told them I wouldn't sign anything since he had signed my birth certificate and was my legal father. They tried everything to pressure me into signing, but I stood my ground. My mom had warned me about this possibility, telling me not to sign anything without reading it carefully because they were trying to cut me out of my inheritance. I refused to sign their documents, and eventually they were forced to include me in the sale. I received almost $8,000 from it, money that they had tried to keep from me. When signing the paperwork for the land sale, I made sure to check that there was nothing related to my grandmother's inheritance included. There wasn't. Fast forward to 3 months ago. With my 21st birthday approaching, I texted my uncle asking about my grandmother's inheritance money and whether I would need to travel anywhere to sort out the paperwork. No response. I waited a week and tried again. Still nothing. That's when I decided to do some digging. I contacted the county court and requested a copy of my grandmother's will. What I found was interesting. My uncle and my female cousin were listed as trustee and alternate trustee for my inheritance. I reached out to my female cousin, telling her I had just found out she was listed as an alternate trustee for my grandmother's inheritance and asking if she knew anything about this. She responded with surprise, saying she had no idea and that she hadn't spoken to my uncle in years. She said she would ask my aunt about this. Later that day, my female cousin forwarded me a message from my aunt. The message claimed that the papers I had refused to sign about my dad would have kept me out of the land sale, but I would have gotten the full $10,000 from my grandmother instead. This made no sense. They were trying to act like I had to choose between my father's land money or my grandmother's inheritance, but these were two completely separate things. Plus, there was nothing about my grandmother's money in those papers they wanted me to sign. I'm fortunate that my mom's best friend is a legal secretary. When I told her what was happening, she immediately got me in touch with a probate lawyer. The lawyer reviewed my grandmother's will and discovered that my uncle, as trustee, had been required to set up a trust account for the money. He never did. The lawyer helped me file a petition with the court. During the hearing, it came out that my uncle had spent the money years ago, thinking I would never find out or pursue it. The judge was not pleased, especially when evidence showed that my aunt and uncle had tried to manipulate me into signing away my rights to the land sale by holding my grandmother's inheritance over my head. The court ordered my uncle to repay the full $10,000 plus interest, removed him as trustee, and appointed an independent trustee to manage the repayment. He was also required to pay all legal fees. My aunt and uncle now avoid family gatherings where I might be present, and several family members who learned about their scheme have cut ties with them. The money was finally deposited into my account last week, but more than the money, I'm glad I trusted my instincts and didn't let them manipulate me. I'm 29 and I work as a software developer at a pretty successful tech company. My fiancé and I met at a mutual friend's barbecue 5 years ago. He works in retail management, and while he makes decent money, I do earn significantly more. My mom was my rock after Dad passed away when I was in college. She was diagnosed with aggressive cancer last year, and within months, she was gone. It was devastating, but I tried to stay strong. My fiancé was there for me throughout the whole ordeal, which meant the world to me. Mom left me her house in her will, a beautiful 3-bedroom place that she'd paid off years ago. The legal process took some time, but 3 months ago, I finally became the official owner. That same week, my fiancé proposed. When I asked him about his previous stance on wanting to wait longer before getting engaged, he replied that with me owning the house now, it felt like the perfect time since we were more financially stable than ever. Something about the timing felt odd, but I was too happy to think much about it. That's until a few days ago, when things started getting weird. He brought up that we should add his name to the house title. When I questioned why, pointing out that the house was my mom's gift to me, He claimed it was about balance in our relationship and marriage, saying we needed to show we're equals. I reminded him that we are equals and that I've never made him feel inferior. He insisted it was important to him and wanted to do it before the wedding. When I expressed my preference to wait until after we're married, he disagreed, saying it didn't make sense and we should do it now. This conversation kept repeating over several days, with him becoming increasingly pushy about it. I stood my ground, telling him to drop it until after the wedding. Then yesterday happened. I was working from home when the doorbell rang. My fiancé was standing there with another man in a suit. He introduced him as the real estate lawyer he'd hired to start the process of adding his name to the title. I was shocked and asked for clarification. The lawyer tried to explain that he had all the paperwork ready, but I cut him off and told him he needed to leave. When the lawyer tried to speak again, I told him to leave my property immediately. After the lawyer left, my fiancé exploded. He accused me of being disrespectful. When I pointed out that he was the one who brought a lawyer to my house without my permission, he claimed he was trying to secure our future and called me selfish and stubborn. That's when I told him I wasn't just reconsidering adding him to the title, but the entire engagement. He stormed out, but the drama didn't end there. My phone started blowing up with messages. He called me ridiculous, claiming he was only thinking about our future. When I confronted him about trying to force me to sign over half of my dead mother's house, he insisted I was being unreasonable and that he was just trying to provide stability for us. That's when it hit me. He proposed right after I got the house, and now he's pushing for partial ownership before the wedding. I did some digging and discovered he's been having money troubles he never told me about. Apparently, he has significant credit card debt and had been hoping to use the house as equity to solve our financial problems. I sent him one final message calling off the wedding and telling him not to contact me again unless it's through my lawyer. Then I blocked him everywhere. The next day, his mother showed up at my door, demanding I stop being so cruel to her son. I simply closed the door in her face and called the police to report her for trespassing when she wouldn't leave. When she was being escorted off my property, I could hear her screaming about how I was ruining her baby's life. I later found out from a mutual friend that he had been bragging to his friends about how he was about to come into some property just weeks before proposing. The house was never about our relationship. It was about solving his financial problems with my inheritance. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.